So, I hereby present a power-laden transition storyline based on the article of Avellino and Robmans of 2009. Avellino and Robmans argued that power should be explicitly conceptualized in transition studies. How? Well, before I show you that, we have to understand what transition really means. A transition is described in terms of particular interactions between landscape, regime and niches, where the dominating regime is transformed or replaced by a new regime. So think of it as if this solid house here symbolizes the regime. The regime stands for the dominant structures, practices and actors within a societal system who defend the status quo. The landscape, here represented by the sun, are the surroundings of a particular societal system. Progress and developments in the landscape are slow. The sun also will probably not change a lot for many years to come. The car symbolizes the niches, which are networks in which innovation can develop. These networks deviate from the dominant structures of the regime. During a transition, 4 different phases can be distinguished. The first is the pre-development phase. Changes occur in the background at landscape or niche level. These changes are resisted by the regime. In the takeoff phase, structural changes start to pressure the regime in such a way that it starts breaking down. The acceleration phase is when structural changes become visible and old regime structures are being replaced by new structures. In the stabilization phase, a new regime has been formed that has replaced the old regime. So, now we know what transition is, how can we incorporate power in this model? Well, first we define power as the ability of actors to mobilize resources to achieve a certain goal. In this definition, resources can be persons, capital, but also mental and natural resources. The requirement is that they can be owned. Now that we have defined power, we can distinguish 5 different types of power. Innovative power is the capacity of actors to create or discover new resources. We symbolize this form of power with a light bulb because a light bulb often stands for innovation and new ideas. Destructive power is the ability to destroy or annihilate existing resources. We symbolize this with the destructing capacity of fire. Constitutive power is the ability to constitute a distribution of resources. The distribution is thus stable and structural. We associate this form of power with a flag. That stands for stability. Transformative power can transform the distribution of resources by replacing old resources with new ones or redistributing resources. The way of distributing resources is temporary here, so we symbolize this power with a clock. Systemic power, at last, is the combined capacity of actors to mobilize resources for the survival of a societal system. Because all power works together here, we visualize it by using a globe. Keep in mind, though, that it is not as simple as it looks. The power relationships of actors can have various levels of balance or imbalance, and there are certain conditions for the exercise of power. However, we will not focus too much on that here. So, we know now what transition is, and we have a concept of power. Now, how can we incorporate these different forms of power in our transition model and explain the interactions between landscape, regime and niches? In our dynamic equilibrium, the regime has more power than the niches and can be seen as the network of actors that exercise constitutive power, hence the flag. Niches exercise innovative and destructive power, symbolized by the light bulb and the fire. In the landscape is systemic power exercised. Then suddenly instability occurs. The pre-development phase comes into existence. The societal system is losing systemic power, and space is offered to more radical forms of innovative and transformative power, exercised by niches who can now strengthen themselves. The regime tries to resist this by looking for a synergetic relationship with niches, in which innovative power enforces the regime's constitutive power. If the niches can resist this, the take-off stage takes place, in which a power vacuum occurs. This is a stage of imbalanced power relations and struggle. The regime tries to survive by increasing the dependency of others on the regime. In the third stage, the acceleration stage, niche networks now have enough space to exercise transformative power and forming so-called niche regimes. The resources are redistributed among actors and old resources are replaced by new ones. In the stabilization phase, these niche regime actors exercise constitutive power to establish a new distribution of resources, and eventually they form a new regime. The power vacuum is filled and there's now a situation of power plenum.
Created using Powtoon.